Women are now the majority in a variety of professions and institutions. Hence her argument, wokeness is not going to go away anytime soon.
If wokeness is an inevitable result of demographic feminization, if any organization or institution that has a critical mass of women is going to behave this way, no matter what their ideology is, if that's the case, then we really can't trust that wokeness is over or will recede naturally or that better arguments will win the day.
This is an important observation, no doubt. She's certainly correct in saying the idea that wokeness is over, that's completely premature. Let's hear her continue.
And I see a lot of people now feel like, okay, the insanity of 2020 is over. People are no longer getting canceled left and right. Maybe the vibe shift is here and wokeness is over. And I think that is premature. I think it is going to be more resilient than that.
The insanity of 2020 is over? Hey, look, anybody who thinks that wokeness began in 2020 is already naive. What we're now calling wokeness is just a recycled, relabeled version of an ideology that people have been peddling since the 1930s.
Did you know I was personally dragged into the whistleblowing about the sexual abuse, trafficking of vulnerable women at the nonprofit organization with a false accusation by the female central to my story? I had support from some famous people like...
One man told me about being beaten by the police and left permanently disabled because of a woman's false allegation.
Hello, it's February 2026. Now, this video is partly going to be a revisit on different topics that I've discussed over the many years. And I'm going to bring them all together to paint a slightly bigger picture of a bigger picture. So these topics are not just pieces being looked at. Now, I want to start off with defining very simply the difference between a liberal type and a conservative type. So for example, a liberal type would say, yes, we help people. Whereas a conservative type will say, we will help that person help themselves so they don't need to be helped by others. Now, the idea of liberals helping is all emotion-based and about feelings. And this whole concept of liberalism is really a feminine political approach. And this is how we see, for example, social justice and all these things rising. Now, I've said many times that even the most conservative types have been infected with liberal ideologies. And that makes sense because from cradle to grave, this is being imposed directly or indirectly, and it's bound to seep in to everyone's mind. Now, I just want to say that I'm not dissing anyone for being a liberal type or conservative type, and I just want to highlight something very important here, especially to Canadians, because in Canada we have two political parties, liberals and conservatives. But what I'm talking about is not these parties, political. I'm talking about the ideologies, the mindset of each. It just so happens in Canada, we have two parties named after these two ideologies. So when you look at how social justice and everything else is really destroying this civilization, this comes from liberalism. Now I'm going to segue here and just tell a story, and I'm going to reference Christian doctrine just because most people are aware of it, and it's somewhat of a story that can be told. So, and it does tie in with feminism. So when you look at the Christian doctrine and the story of Lucifer and rebelling in heaven and everything else and being cast to this earth, and I'm sure everyone's heard of that story, the whole basis of that rebellion is wanting equality. Lucifer wanting, according to the story, equality with God, according to Christian doctrine. And for this, got cast out with a third of his followers. And essentially, you can say that Lucifer would have been the first libertarian. And then when you segue this into, for example, Satanism and people who worship as a descriptive the devil, Lucifer, whoever, however you want to call this descriptive, they refer to Lucifer or Satan or whomever as the liberator. Keep this in mind. Now, how does this tie in with feminism? Is because when you look at the foundation, the core of feminism, its origins, and the women who began it, and it still continues to this day when you actually look into it, it has a very satanic origin and everything that's pushing the ideology. Now, see how everything ties in together. Now, I'm not promoting Christianity or saying either way. I'm using this as a story to help paint this picture. So with feminism now, we see feminism claiming that they wanted equality. They wanted equal rights, which the whole idea of feminism is based on lies and myths. And there's as I've said in other videos, there's a lot of other people who have discussed this in great depth, who have a massive knowledge base on these topics. And I'll name one that just comes to my head, Karen Strawn. When you look at her older content, she's like an encyclopedia on this topic. And there's others as well who've even written recent books on this topic. So the whole idea with a feminine political view, this is liberalism. And what people are starting to see now, they're starting to see through all that, how this whole feminist movement is a big scam, just like pretty much everything else in this world. Now, because of the liberal types gaining a number, and especially appealing to younger people who have no life experience and no knowledge base to draw on, they're very drawn to this. And from this we can see the desire more and more for certain types of governance that is very, as a descriptive, suppressing. And we're starting to see this already now, for example, with censorships and everything else. Meanwhile, you have the conservative types. Again, this has nothing to do with the actual politics, for example, in Canada, the mindset, watching, going, what, this is ridiculous, what's going on? And we see, as I've discussed in the previous video, how perceptions of reality are so different just between the two, left and right. And they're both looking at each other, pointing the fingers, not seeing that they're really the same types of people doing the same types of things, just different flavor of Kool-Aid being argued over. That's it. And it all has the same end result. With the rise of liberalism, now we start to see, for example, how through false self-empowerment, through this imaginary equality, we start to see people obtaining various positions of authority who have no need to be there. We don't have anymore, for example, a strong, mentally, physically, and spiritually, as a descriptive, alpha types in these positions accomplishing or doing what they should be doing, leadership. Instead, now we have beta and omega types obtaining these positions through some sort of equality thing. Now we're starting to see from this perspective why everything is falling apart in the civilization. Because these people should not be in these positions. And through this, we see the wrong people obtaining these positions of authority. And authority can mean anything from a governing body to law to education, medical even. And we see, for example, in the medical professions right now, how sensitive and skewed some of these people in the medical profession, their interpretation of things is. It's ridiculous. I've had my own personal experiences with this as well. But when you allow just anyone now, all willy-nilly obtaining these positions, you start to attract, for example, bad people, perhaps sociopaths, psychopaths, whatever. You start to attract these people into it. And this allows, for example, abuse of authority. Now take, for example, in my story in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And we're going to start off, for example, with the so-called trial judge of the criminal matter that I dealt with, who wrongfully convicted me and who didn't even convict me beyond a reasonable doubt because he cast doubt on the conviction 3 times. And when I say so-called trial judge, it's for a reason. Because this individual had little to no criminal law experience, sat on a committee with ties to that local police force. He was selected to do the trial of my matter because it involved not only 2 former Calgary police officers, but this also impacted Calgary politically as well as Alberta politically. He was selected. Now, am I just saying that off the cuff? No. Because when you look at, for example, the first level of appeal, the judge for that was 110% on my side. And during those proceedings, he had asked if I wanted him seized, which means that he'll be listening to the appeal. And the Crown, at that time, because I went through like 5 or 6 Crown prosecutors, because apparently none of them wanted to take the case, agreed to it. And we had to wait, I think it was like 4 months, I think it was 4 or 5 months until his next availability. And if he would have heard that case, then I would have won on appeal. However, what ended up happening was that day, that morning, just before my court session began, they switched judges. So the judge that was seized for my case, who was 110% on my side, didn't hear the case. They had someone else selected to hear the case, and they went south for me. So when I talk about the trial judge of the trial proper, he was selected. So we see, for example, people like that in these positions, ultimately, because the wrong people are being hired, because of equality because of an ideology that is very self-destructive. And now we see, for example, how the liberal ideologies are imploding on itself on other topics. For example, we had this whole women's rights movement and everything else, and they supported one group because of their sexual preference, and then they turned around and supported another group because of their kinks with their sexual preferences. And this just erased the line of having any boundaries in society, to the point where they're even advocating for, I'm trying to wordcraft here, engaging with physical activities with someone too young. Wow, it's a mouthful. But what has happened, what we start to see happen, is we start to see how that backfired, for example, on the feminists, because now we had men going into their world and totally disrupting their world. Then they turn their backs on them. And another more recent example, how we're seeing these liberal types going into, for example, a Christian place of worship, their church, and disrupting, illegally disrupting, protesting within this church during a church service. And they're quite fine with that because, well, I'll get to the because shortly. So these people were chanting this woman's name and saying, say her name, and then said her name. Now you have another group who is well known for being very destructive when they're not happy, say, well, you can't use that because that belongs to us. Well, that whole idea of say my name, they didn't invent it, nor do they have any claim to it. But now you see how they're attacking each other. And we see, for example, people who are against the federal agents known as ICE, they're attacking each other too now. And everything has just gotten so out of hand. Everything that I've said so far is by design, not by anyone that you think you voted for at any level, including presidents and prime ministers. It's designed by those who do control them. Now, everything is spinning out of control because there's no accountability. There's no repercussions. What we see from time to time is, and it goes to that saying, F around and find out. Sometimes we're starting to see these people thinking that there's going to be no repercussions, and whoa, surprise, surprise, there are repercussions. Sometimes the repercussions are the extreme, usually by their own doing. I've talked about this in recent videos as well. And it's unfortunate, but it could have been avoided. But even with that, you see a divide on perceptions. And how, and I've said this 10, 15 years ago, how civilization societies are so micro-fractured. You'll have, for example, two people disagreeing heavily. They're ready to take each other from life on one topic, but another one pops up, and all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, well, we agree on this, so now we're buddy-buddies, and we're going after this other person. And then you have these people eventually going, hey, wait a minute, we disagree on this other thing, so let's just go back to working with each other. Kind of like what's called a Mexican standoff. Nothing against Mexicans, it's just a term. And here we are today. Rewinding all the way back, we are here today because of an ideology that has never worked and destined to fail, and perhaps, just perhaps, whether you want to accept it or not, does have, as a descriptive, very evil roots. That's all I had to say. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share.
And so this is the moment they run into the church and start causing mayhem. Not a single person in that congregation had anything to do with Renee Good's life getting taken. Renee Good got her own life taken from her by impeding federal law enforcement, blocking their vehicle, and then when they told her to get out of the car, which is a lawful order, she ran one over. What do these people mean, justice for Renee Good?
Just remember, I was one man against many. Fighting a losing battle, but I still fought to the end.
That means press on. That means endure. That means God cannot fail, and you're not going to give up. That's not an option for a child of God. This means you are going to be free. Listen to this and write it down if you can't remember it. You're never going to outgrow warfare. You simply must learn to fight. I hear people saying to me, oh, when is it going to get easier? When you die.